Governor limits. Suppose you go to the gym, you've waited all day, you've worked so hard, and it's time for you to relieve some stress. You want to get on the treadmills, there's about 20 of them, and you waited 5 minutes, and there's people running on all of them, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, and nobody is getting off the treadmill. There's actually a couple of people that are just standing there, not even running or jogging or moving, but they're just standing on the treadmills and chit-chatting with each other. So you go to talk to the gym and say, hey, this is a shared property and maybe we should place limits on those treadmills. And so the next day they place quote unquote governor limits, basically saying that this is a multi-user treadmill. So if you're going to use the treadmill, you cannot use it more than 30 minutes. Similarly, in Salesforce, it's a multi-tenant environment, and that's why we have governor limits. So governor execution limits ensure the efficient use of resources on the Force.com multi-tenant platform. It is the limit specified by the Salesforce.com on code execution for efficient processing. As we know, Epix runs in a multi-tenant environment that is a single resource is shared by all the customers and organizations. So it is necessary to make sure that no one monopolizes the resources, and hence Salesforce.com has created the set of limits which governs and limits the code execution. Whenever any of the governor limits are crossed, it will throw error and will halt the execution of programs. From a developer's perspective, it is important for us to ensure that our code should be scalable and should not hit the limits. All these limits are applied on per transaction basis. A single trigger execution is one transaction, for instance. As we have seen, the trigger design pattern helps avoid the limit error. We will see other important limits as well. And so as we're developing our code, it's important to always review and remember the governor limits. So other Salesforce governor limits includes what's on this list. How do we avoid SOQL query limits? We can use only 100 queries per transaction. That is, when our code will issue more than 100 SOQL queries, then it will throw an error. Let's look at an example that shows how SOQL query limit can be reached. The following trigger iterates over a list of customers and updates the child records, which is the invoice, description with a string OK to pay. When the update customer description method is called and the number of customer records are more than 100, then it will hit the SOQL limit. To avoid this, let's never write a SOQL query in the for loop. In this case, the SOQL query has been written in the for loop. So as we can see in this example, we'll show how to avoid the DML as well as the SOQL limit. We have used the nested relationship query to fetch the invoice records and used the context variable trigger.newMap to get the map of ID and customer records. Dml Bulk Calls. This example shows the bulk trigger along with the trigger helper class pattern. However, we need to first save the helper class and then save the trigger. Of course, you can kind of copy and paste this code in the customer trigger helper class, which can be created And so as we're developing our code, it's important to always review and remember the governor limits. So other Salesforce governor limits includes what's on this list.